Hi, everybody. My name is Kate Wilson, and I'm the CEO of the Digital Impact Alliance. We're a Think, Do, Replicate tank that is based in Washington, D.C. Suffice it to say, this has been an unprecedented year. COVID-19 has upended our lives, but the opportunity it has also presented us to look at digital transformation journeys of digital sprinters around the globe is an extraordinary one, as we all have grown dependent upon this technology to do so much more than it was even doing 9 months ago. At Dial, we believe that countries around the globe sharing their stories of digital transformation and responsible data use can provide examples to others and stand as beacons of hope to others. We think that there are 4 persistent problems affecting digital technology and responsible data use that seem to be very prevalent no matter what country in the world you live in. Do you have the appropriate products to meet your country's needs and context? Are there the right pricing and procurement mechanisms in place? Are policies that govern responsible data use that are driven by and with citizens in place to ensure that your data is used responsibly? And last but certainly not least, do we have the people who can learn, live, and innovate on top of these platforms and chart their national futures forward that are appropriate to their country and their context? At Dial, we believe that we are all digital learners, and no matter your background, geographic location, or situation, we must all work together to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and truly have technology that serves us as citizens and runs and manages our future to address core issues such as the global pandemic of COVID-19 has presented us all with. I'm very excited today to moderate this outstanding panel today composed of government, business, and technology entrepreneurs for a conversation to learn how they are thinking about and shaping Latin America's future of digital transformation. With that, I'd like to ask Guy from Google to kick us off and explain to us a little bit what Google has been exploring in terms of digital transformation and their thinking. Guy?
Terrific, Kate. Thank you so much. But let me just mention, both individually and on behalf of Google, we cannot be more excited about introducing this initiative and actually chatting about this initiative with such a distinguished panel today. Let me just mention before I get started, this is an initiative that we have spent much effort, deliberation, and resources on. It is also something that's very central to our work with emerging markets, and particularly the Americas. So for all those reasons, again, we cannot be more excited about the panel today. And with that in mind, let me quickly just switch on the few slides that we had prepared. 1 sec. Okay, so the digital sprinters. What we are proposing is a framework for harnessing the digital transformation into sustainable, inclusive growth. Maybe a note about the name digital sprinters. It is important to note that we were deliberate about the name digital sprinters. It reflects a recognition, an important recognition, that with the right strategies, emerging markets and the Americas in particular have this tremendous potential to sprint ahead. And not only sprint ahead, even leapfrog and surpass more established markets. In our view, from our experience, it's not a question of if this will happen. It's really a question of where and when will this happen, and perhaps most importantly, which digital sprinters, which markets will do so. And with that in mind, let me get to the first point that we wanted to cover today. And we thought that maybe we start by explaining the fundamental question, kind of like the elephant in the room, if you will. Why an economic agenda? Why is it so important? And why is it so critical at this precise moment? So bear with me for a minute and imagine a world where economists are actually really fascinating storytellers, and so clearly a counterfactual. So if this question, why an agenda, was a novel, I would say that there's a plot line that includes 3 chapters. One chapter about a crisis, one chapter about an opportunity, and one chapter about a road ahead. And with that plot line, with that novel in mind, let me kind of like try and address this first question. The first chapter of this plot line about the global crisis. So the humanitarian toll and the adverse economic impact of the COVID pandemic does not need an introduction. And yet it's unimaginable to think of any economic narrative today that does not start with the pandemic. The reason why the pandemic is so important in our context, again, a digital agenda for emerging markets, is because what I'll refer to as pre-existing economic conditions, and how the pandemic actually elevated or intensified these conditions and brought them to the center of our public discourse. So just to put it in context, if you think about it, to a great degree, the crisis exacerbated economic challenges that emerging markets were dealing with prior to the pandemic. So think about providing economic stability to the informal sector that Kate mentioned, addressing unemployment, preparing the workforce to a 21st century economy. These are all challenges that emerging markets were dealing with prior to the pandemic, but they were also elevated during the pandemic. And perhaps more importantly, these are not only short-term recovery objectives, they are very much long-term objectives as well. And in fact, they are the very building blocks of the kind of like practical aspirations of emerging markets to catch up and surpass established markets. And this is important, as it implies that recovery efforts can be leveraged into long-term goals. And because the crisis, in a way, unearthed our weaknesses, if you will, it also provides a perfect opportunity to address long-term goals. So in a sense, if the crisis is the perfect storm that we detail in the white paper, the Digital Sprinters white paper, it also presents the perfect opportunity. And with that in mind, let me turn to the next chapter, which is the opportunity. So if we think of a crisis as an opportunity, we kind of like need to pause for a second and think about the circumstances in which the crisis is actually taking place. And the pandemic, as we all know, did not take place in a vacuum. It so happens that we have actually just witnessed 2 historical global events, both made possible by advances in digital technology. The first one relates to extreme poverty. And over the past 2 decades, more than 1 billion people were lifted out of extreme poverty. An achievement probably unprecedented in human history. And as only 9% of the world's population today is still under such poverty, that implies that probably in our generation, we are at the cusp of eradicating extreme poverty. The second event relates to global internet access. And within a single decade alone, internet access was actually expanded to 2.3 billion people. That's nearly 1/3 of humanity. And let me pause for a minute and think about this second development, and I want to do it on the next slide. And kind of highlight that the reason why the addition of nearly 2.5 billion users is so important is because these are primarily individuals that are located in emerging economies or emerging markets. And as this chart illustrates, it was only a few years ago that emerging markets accounted for roughly 1/3 of the digital population, whereas today that the emerging markets account for the majority, about 72% of the digital population or of internet users. So if you think about it, that means that there are more people online or more online users today in emerging countries than there are in established countries. And that means that there are more people that are getting information online, purchasing products online, using applications, and participating in social media in emerging markets. Needless to say, this can have tremendous ramifications for the economic balance of power, the global economic balance of power. So revolution is not a term that we use lightly at Google, but the thought that within a few years, we witnessed a transformation that can shift the global economic balance of power between emerging and established markets is absolutely astounding. And with that, let me turn to the third and last chapter, which is the road ahead. So we are living through a challenging crisis that inflicts difficult humanitarian toll, but also through unprecedented historical opportunities, as I just described. And yet, this is not the first time that we are at a watershed moment or at an inflection point, if you will. And if history repeats itself, it is misguided to assume that no positive change would come out of the crisis. And in fact, some of the most important policy advancements were born out of times of economic crisis. Think about the Great Depression in the US that led to the introduction of social safety nets. World War II, which resulted in the launch of multinational institutions. Or the 1990s Asian currency crisis, which led to sweeping financial reforms, particularly, by the way, in those Asian markets that were most adversely impacted. So the scenario that we're in is not necessarily difficult. These precedents suggest that this difficult scenario that we're in can serve as a launch pad for bold, positive change, an opportunity to leverage digital transformation towards sustainable, inclusive economic growth. And this is fundamentally why we felt that it is so important to publicly release and share our thoughts about the digital transformation and its tremendous potential in emerging markets. So while this is all great, let me turn to what we're actually suggesting and what is the proposed framework. As you can see in the slide here, which reflects the proposed framework, let me actually make two important observations about the framework itself. So for those of you that are kind of like looking at the glass half empty, the first point is, if you think about it, our framework is really limited to digital policies. Now, economic development, as we all know, does not depend on a single reform or policy. There is a multitude of social, legal, institutional factors that need to be addressed for development to take place. And we focus on the area where we feel that we have expertise, which again is digital policies and technologies. This leads me kind of like to the second point. For those of you that are kind of like looking at the half glass full, within the digital space, the white paper itself, the framework, is deliberately broad in scope. We propose 13 different policy areas with over 30 different recommendations. And I think that to a great degree, this is a reflection of the complex and dynamic nature of the digital ecosystem itself. And perhaps to be a bit blunt, complex ecosystems do require complex set of strategies. And maybe I can demonstrate this interdependence within the digital ecosystem and why we actually need such a comprehensive agenda through an example. So if you think about one of the four pillars that we're suggesting, the human capital, which you see at the upper top right-hand corner, it includes digital skill development and it details the steps that are needed to prepare the workforce of the Americas for a digital economy. And yet when it comes to technology and jobs, we know that new technologies create new jobs. But what we don't know, what we typically do not know, is what labor markets actually look like. We simply do not have sufficient granular, reliable, and real-time data to shed light over supply and demand conditions, as well as outcomes in local labor markets. And this is an issue that we are, of course, dealing with both established and emerging markets, as we see time and again that without collaboration between digital platforms that collect data and government agencies that have the ability to deploy and aggregate such data on a national scale, such efforts to provide the labor market data are less likely to be effective. And if you think about it, if those initiatives are not going to be effective, and if we don't have sufficient reliable data on labor market outcomes or projections for future labor market outcomes, that may actually undermine digital skill development, because our skill development programs are now kind of like flying blind, if you will. And if that's the case, where our digital skill development is ineffective, that may make participation in the labor force even less inclusive. So underrepresented groups, which so critically depend on digital skill development programs, would find it even more difficult to obtain inclusion within labor markets. And this is just an example of how the solutions that we offer and their effectiveness are really interdependent, and why we do need a comprehensive agenda that simultaneously addresses these various challenges. But perhaps more importantly, another aspect of this example is that much of our framework is not about the need for more funding, but rather it's about maximizing the resources that we have through collaborations and improved resource management. And that too is another central theme of our agenda. With that in mind, let me turn to measuring the impact of digital transformation. And perhaps let me just kind of mention individually that when we undertook this project, we all suspected that the impact of digital transformation can be meaningful. But we also recognize that these are kind of like our preconceived conjectures or beliefs. So we did retain a third-party consulting firm to measure the potential impact of digital transformation in emerging markets. And the results are pretty fascinating, as can be seen in this chart here. So first, the study confirms that a digital framework can have a significant impact. And focusing on the 16 emerging markets that were included in the report, the benefits that a digital agenda can generate are estimated at $3.4 trillion as of 2030, a decade from today. So if you look at Brazil, which accounts for 617 billion, Mexico with 316, Argentina with 149, Colombia with 114, Chile with 96, and Peru with $76 billion. These 6 countries alone add up to roughly half of those benefits, about 1.6 billion. Now, just to put those numbers in perspective, they add up to roughly 22% of GDP in 2030. So it's not only a large number in absolute terms, but also when you compare it to GDP, it appears to have a significant impact. And perhaps more importantly, the analysis indicates that a digital transformation may help put American emerging markets on par with roughly where established markets are today. And perhaps that's the most important takeaway from this entire analysis, this entire empirical analysis, which is a factual corroboration that there is a pathway for digital sprinters to catch up with more established markets within a single decade. That is significant. Now, let me turn to the last point that I wanted to make about identifying opportunities and setting priorities. And let me perhaps just provide some background on that. So there's a little bit of a natural tension in what we are proposing. On the one hand, we highlighted a wide set of policies, almost a manual, if you will. And then on the other hand, there's significant diversity across South and Central American markets. And there's clearly no single American market, and there's no two economies in South or Central America that are alike. So there's kind of like a natural need to identify where each market should start, where should they focus, and what would be the right priorities. And to some extent, the empirical analysis that we conducted provides, I would say, helpful data points to at least start a conversation about what the priorities are. So this very diversity across American countries in particular, I think to a great extent is reflected in the chart here. And if you take, for instance, if countries were to focus on, let's say, the top 2 segments with the greatest potential. So according to these numbers, Brazil would benefit the most from prioritizing financial services and infrastructure, whereas Peru may generate the greatest impact by focusing on natural resources and advancing its e-government. So our commission study can also help identify the segments that are most likely to generate the greater impact, which is hopefully, again, another important data point for future conversation. Let me conclude by just making the following statement, or by perhaps emphasizing that given the pandemic and the crisis that we're in, given the historical global events that we are witnessing, the importance of a digital agenda framework cannot be understated. And for this reason, we cannot be more excited to introduce the white paper and hope that it will indeed lead to more dialogue, improved strategies, and long-lasting partnerships in the Americas. And with that in mind, Kate, first I want to give a shout out to my colleague Rod, who has done so much work on this project. And Kate, to you, the organizers, and to the rest of the panelists, a heartfelt thank you. And let me send this back to you.
Thanks so much, Guy. It was a really fascinating presentation and set of points. I particularly loved sort of the story arc that you presented, the opportunity that we have to really shape new policies and the importance of putting in place a digital framework that can guide all of us. I'd ask my fellow panelists to please come off mute, maybe stay on mute, but actually turn on your cameras so that we can kick off the informal conversation that we really hope to have from here. And just to ask for sort of reflections from you, and if I could start with you, Your Excellency Chinchilla, to actually offer some thoughts of, how does this resonate with your experience, extensive experience, but also your experience leading Costa Rica?
Well, thank you, Kate. For sure, I can tell you that when you are in office trying to take decisions about how to tackle economic problems, inequality, and to improve the governance of your country, technologies become a very important tool, probably the most important ally that we can find. And so I totally agree with the approach that Guy presented us, because beyond all the suffering that the pandemic brought to our world, it has also created this perfect storm that he mentioned for digital transformation. So in the case of Latin America, I think we can find the opportunities for building a more dynamic, inclusive, and sustainable economies, and also to fostering a stronger recovery. However, at the same time, I just want to admit or to recognize that the perspective in Latin America is very challenging, because before the crisis hit us, the region was growing at a very low pace with low productivity rates, and inequality was on the rise. Just let me give you, Kate, some figures presenting the problem that we have today concerning the digital divide that created the pandemic. 1/3 of the people in Latin America were not able to connect to internet, which represents 40% of the households. In the countryside, it is 75%. 46% of the children from 5 to 12 years old were not able to have e-learning, which means that they did not have access to education at all. Almost 80% of the working people, and this is a very important data, 80% of the working people are performing jobs that cannot be incorporated to the digital space. So it talks not only about digital strategy, but also a labor market strategy. And finally, I can't avoid talking about the role of women, although we don't have the specific figures for Latin America. We know that worldwide, according to the ITU, 60% of women in developing countries do not have access to new technologies. And according to the IMF, women will be twice as likely as men to be displaced by technology in the next 2 decades if we do not do something different. So I think this is the opportunity to bring together the people, the stakeholders, the strategies, the policies, to take decisions concerning the role of technology in our recovery and long-term development process.
Thank you so much for that. Before I turn to another panelist, I was curious, when you saw the framework that was presented, did you feel like there was a particular dependency where we needed to start first, or did you feel that they were each equally important from your vantage point?
Yes, I think that in our case, I mean, as a general framework, I find that that is a very good, it presents very good guidelines, but knowing our region, I will recommend to add some more specific kind of considerations. First, it's going to be very important to build coalitions. Government, corporations, the multilateral organizations are very important in our region, the NGOs, the academy, in order to join efforts and commit to creating numerous ecosystems of opportunities to accelerate the massive use of technologies. According to my criteria, I will prioritize the digitalization of schools, the productive units, and governments. Secondly, thinking strategically and planning is going to be very critical, and that is not very common, unfortunately, in our region. It is necessary to put in place the right strategies and a comprehensive, well-planned and coordinated policy efforts. Because we have to understand that it is not technology on its own that will bring the positive change. It is the policy and the institutions framework that will shape how positive will be the impact of technologies. Third, we should think about acting regionally. So we should advance in more kind of a strategic and concerted regional agenda that at least can focus on policies that activate transformative long-term dynamics. But a very important pillar of this agenda should be a regional digital market. And finally, the mobilization of the resources. And that has to do with encouraging private policy alliances, and also inviting, again, the multilateral financial system to support these strategies. Finally, let me say something else and I will finish. We should build on best practices because there are good things happening in the region. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely, and you offered so many fantastic points. Instead of my weighing in on them, however, Leonardo, I was curious, would you like to weigh in sort of from the perspective from Mexico and sort of what do you think particularly about some of the regional approach as well as your perspectives on the framework that Guy offered?
I think the framework that Guy offered is very, very helpful. I would say, well, we will have a very similar view. First, for this perfect storm to happen, we needed to have some conditions. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. We needed to have some deployment of infrastructure. And in the case of Mexico, that was, well, considerably greater than 20 years ago. We have 70% of the population 6 years or older that have access to internet. And I wouldn't be surprised that by the end of this year, it would grow to 75 or 80% because there has been a huge demand for internet services. And so that was a basis. And also we had a basis of regulation and what I call digital trust, which is all the legal framework. We have these consumer protection, privacy laws, competition laws, and also a specific law on telecommunications that regulates deployment, interconnection, and all of this is very important as a basis. But after that, then we face the challenges. And those challenges are clearly related to these digital skills that we're talking about. And those digital skills are about population, some very basic skills for so many people. And then in businesses and professional development, we have very more specialized skills that we need to develop. And that's a big challenge for us. We have been working, and as has been said before, this has to be done not only by government or only by private sector, but it's a matter of creating ecosystems that work together to develop this. And we also have this thing of having the small and medium enterprises to have the technology that is useful for them. But the technology has to be related to their needs. And so we have to focus them on how to make their business models adaptable to this technology. And that's the great challenge, because it's relatively easy to start using technology, but to change your business model into a digital model, that's a greater challenge. And that I think that's something we have to work a lot in Mexico. And having said that, I think we have to all be thinking about this idea of the technology and the regulation and the government, private sector, on creating value, on this technology making things different, and the government being concentrated on these things that are absolutely essential, not having too much regulation, but just enough regulation to create certainty. And in those cases, there are some goods that we have to take care, like interconnection in the case of networks, or social security, things like that. That would be my initial statement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leonardo. Victor, I was curious, would you be able to offer sort of some reflections both on the framework, but also I think where Leonardo was really picking up with some of those 4 Ps that I mentioned at the beginning of, like, what do we need to do from a policy perspective? What do we need to do from a people capacity level perspective? What do we need to do to make sure we have the right products in place? And how do we have the right policies that both balance innovation and protection at the same point in time? How are you thinking about this?
Really, in Colombia, we have been working the same way. Really, we have here a word that we use, that is that we talk about smart regulation, because it's important that not over-regulate. It's important that understand that use the ways like a sandbox that have the opportunity to adopt the new technology, the new business, the new models, and how we can approach them without over-regulation. That we have been working in that way. At this moment, we have a sandbox related with a cryptocurrency that 2 years ago that was impossible. Now we have been working in that way, or we have been working in a sandbox related with artificial intelligence. That means that we understand that the digital economy, that the innovation, that the entrepreneurship need ecosystem, need the support of the government, that they can advance in terms of the run the business in the country with the right regulation. And that means that we can create a new regulation working with them together. That is the first point. The second point is that we have been working really in conditions to have the better policy that we can have related, and how can we have the government, a digital government, basically when we have been working here, and how we can have a government, a friendly government related with digital economy. The first step is how we can adopt the technology into the government too. And in that case, we have been working a lot in how we can change the legal frameworks to adopt interoperability, digital identity, how we can use more innovation into the processing in government, and in terms of products and release that have the opportunity to test that in terms of the public agencies. That we have been working in Colombia with a framework. We have 7 components in a framework that I think that is aligned with the guys said. Is we have been working in connectivity, we have been working in talent, digital economy, digital government, innovation, cybersecurity, and co-creation. We have a strong relation with private sector, and we have been working together in how we can adopt technology in the new world.
Amazing.
That are my basic reflections.
Luis, largest economy, largest one of the traditional leaders in the space. Could you provide your perspectives on sort of how you're thinking about this from the perspective of Brazil?
Well, Brazil is huge, as you guy just told us, showed us. Regarding internet presence and number of users, we are the 4th internet population in the world. Most of the social media platforms, we stand on 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in number of users. So we have a huge demand for digital technology and digital economy. I have to tell you that we have some of the same challenges that Leonardo just said regarding infrastructure, regarding digital skills, regarding adoption of digital technologies from multiple sectors. But some sectors, industrial sectors in Brazil, industry sectors in Brazil are already fully digital. And I mean, agribusiness is it uses lots of digital technology to make Brazil more productive on this sector. Financial sector in Brazil is huge in adopting technologies for many years. So we have a very stable and 100% digital financial system. We just launched a new instant payment platform called Pix. That is it's a success since the first day. We have millions of users of instant payment right now, and it was launched 16 days ago. So many of the industries in Brazil have already I would say the capacity to deliver digital technology. Regarding government, by the side of the government and myself, I'm responsible for the digital government, the digital transformation of the Brazilian federal government, and I coordinate this effort with states and municipalities. We have a strategy called Brazilian Digital Transformation Strategy that stands very well how we aim to achieve and how we want to move forward on these issues. Some of the challenges we had, we already achieved, since like the data privacy and data protection regulation that is now working here in Brazil. But on the side of the government, we are accelerating the transformation, making simpler the life for business and citizens in Brazil. So we move from kind of 40% of digital transactions on the governmental side to 64% of all the transactions through digital channels right now. We are working on some of the same path that many countries are doing. We are working on interoperability standards and platforms. We are launching on the next month the digital ID in Brazil, which is a powerful infrastructure for the digital economy in the country. So what from the governmental side, we want to reduce the burdens for the digital economy. In sense, we are cleaning all the legacy legislation that we had. We are making a huge reform on the legislative side, and we are fostering some innovative legislation, such as the legal framework for startups. We just sent to the Congress a brand new legislative proposal on startups. We have a legal framework for innovation that helps to increase research and development in Brazil. So we have many challenges. We are not where we should be yet, but I'm sure that the digital environment in Brazil, and it was very accelerated. It was accelerated during COVID-19 crisis. We just launched today a GDP, the information of a GDP increase of 7.7% last quarter, and most of that increase was based on electronic transactions. So I guess for sure the future is digital. What becomes digital does not turn back. There's no way people that use and business that use digital technologies will come back to the analog environment. So our role here is to accelerate as much as possible.
Thank you so much. You all have really highlighted, I think, the degree to which your economies have changed, the need to put in place the very specific regulations, how much your economies are now becoming increasingly dependent upon digital, and the complex set of challenges that you really have to actually realize that future. Marcelo, I was curious, sort of from representing Google and the vantage point that you have, do you think about sort of what your colleagues were really calling for in terms of calling for sort of public-private partnership, which was really a strong theme? You know, how do you see sort of the digital sprinters agenda and program and thinking really kind of weaving in and addressing some of the challenges that have been laid out?
Hi, Kate. Thank you so much for the question. You know, I think what comes out from both studies, it's that emerging economy have focused considerable resource and efforts into driving digital access for the population and business, and hoping to capture, you know, economic growth impact from that. However, what the data showed in those studies is that the transition from the digital penetration to economic growth and in improvement in livelihoods of the population is not a straightforward pace. Yes. For example, in many emerging economies, the growth of internet users has vastly outpaced the economic growth. And the implications that digital access alone will not solve the economic and productive growth challenges faced in those economies. And emerging economies will need to go kind of beyond the increase of digital connectivity in order to capture all the opportunities brought by those technologies. We think that in order to advance a digital agenda, countries and especially the governments, they would need to address a range of interconnected issues that as Guy mentioned, fall into 4 broad categories. It's physical capital, human capital, technology itself, and competitiveness. Each of which needs to be addressed to achieve sustainable and inclusive growth. Yes. While such issues we understand requires a comprehensive approach, it may be also useful to put forth, you know, thoughts about setting priorities and identifying areas which may have relatively higher impacts, and talking about how we can, you know, what areas we think we could partner, or how we with agenda we can prioritize on this. The Alphabet study that we commissioned may be helpful in identifying such directions. For example, it indicates that the composition of economic sectors that may have greater impact from digitalization varies from one market to another. For instance, like for Brazil, the segment with the greatest economic impact appears to be the financial service, and Secretary Luis just mentioned the announcement of the digital bank system here in Brazil, which was a huge success. But for example, for Mexico, Argentina, and Colombia, the alpha beta analysis identify other sectors like resource. So I think like there's a bunch of possibilities, but we need to have this more broad and overall perspective of how to tackle this digital agenda.
Thank you so much. Marcelo, what would you like to offer to add to, sorry, Felipe, what would you like to offer, add, sorry, not enough coffee for me this morning. What would you like to offer, add to Marcelo's comments, please?
Thanks, Kate. I think I'd like to bring some perspectives in two dimensions here. One would be like we need to instrumentalize this discussion in actionable ways. We could really like bridge this gap, and I think that speed and capital efficiency are like important ways to go. And I'm saying this because I'd like to point out the role of startups or tech startups in this whole process. So tech startups, the new companies, they are have been proving very resilient and adaptable to these moments. They are small, fast, cheaper, and they have been generating a lot of new jobs and net job creation. They are representing a very interesting opportunity for the region to really use technology to leapfrog in many I would say structural gaps that the crisis has just highlighted and exposed. But in the other way, it brings us the opportunity to attack those gaps and use it as a tool to come up with a faster recovery. But what I would say that are the main challenges that we face in regards to really being able to come up with a tech response for the crisis comes to the human capital side of the framework that Guy was just presenting us. So we have studies that are showing that by the end of this decade, in Brazil alone, we'll have more than 1 million jobs that won't be fulfilled due to the lack of qualified professionals. And this said, from a country and a region that has been facing lots of problems with job creation and social inequality and everything. So I think that if we look at the crisis as an opportunity to fulfill some of those structural gaps, I would say that probably one of the main areas of focus of policies and the government is education and forming, like creating a talent pool that will be able to deliver technological-based solutions for all of those problems. So, and the good side of it is that if we focus policies in that direction, we can also use them to try to correct some problems that we have along the way and leapfrog with them as well. One of them being diversity. If you look at the talent pool of technology nowadays, it's majorly a group of male professionals, white professionals. So, and if we have a problem on having more people qualified in tech, we also have the opportunity to opportunity to educate more people, and by doing so, trying to attack also the diversity gap, the gender gap, the race gap, and so on. So I think that alongside of educating more people, empowering new company creation and startup acceleration will be two streams of attacking this problem in the region.
So really, I think picking up on what President Chinchilla was alluding to, which is use the technology opportunity in front of us to educate the next group of people who can then, in turn, create what is the digital future of the digital economy for each of your respective groups. Because we do collectively around the world need to build, people who feel comfortable choosing, using, procuring, and really innovating and implementing. And that's the only way we'll really see sort of true global digital transformation that meets the right country contexts that are in place. It's fascinating. Diego, I was curious, would you like to sort of add on to that from sort of Felipe's comments and sort of how you see that sort of evolving, or, really comment on Guy's framework in the first place?
No, thank you, Kate. Basically, I have two comments. I've been doing technology policy for more than 25 years. I've been a regulator for more than 5 years. I was a minister in Colombia. I've held many presidents in the world, many mayors with different companies, with McKinsey, with the IADB, with the OECD. And today I see clearly the priority of what Felipe said. I mean, what Felipe just said, it is what we have to do. Let's focus on talent, because we have to tackle the jobs, and that's urgent. That's what the President Chinchilla said. We have to get the jobs for the post-pandemic world to leapfrog. So let's focus on education. And you know what? The half glass empty that God mentioned. Education, it is far behind in terms of digital transformation. So we are focusing on many things, but education is very, very, very far away from what we have to do. So I lead the university in 3 countries, focus on digital talent for the base of a pyramid for low-income students in Colombia, Panama, and Costa Rica. I do that, and I do other things, but basically we have to create new ways to do it. Most of the speakers here have said we have an issue of inequality. The main source of inequality of Latin America is education. But we already know that what we have doesn't work. We have to create a new education system for this new economy. That's the first thing. The second thing, and Guy, you guys in Google have done a fantastic job. This is a fantastic document. Congratulations. But in order to really make it real, we have to focus on how to execute it. And that's the issue. I've seen hundreds, thousands of proposals in bookshelves, in ministries, in presidents' palaces, in mayor's offices. But we lack of the skill of executing them. Beautiful. I mean, I was part of the team writing Going Digital of the OECD, which is a fantastic document. But when we see how many countries or cities or sub-national governments have executed on that, that's very poor, almost none. So we have to focus on how to execute that. So we have to see what the key success factors of that execution. What are those factors? The first one, leadership. So, and the question is, again, it goes to the first issue of talent. Do we have the talented leaders to execute that? And I'm afraid the answer is no. Secondly, communications. We have to communicate this. I mean, who cares? I mean, a person in Sao Paulo today that doesn't have a job, he doesn't care about the data policy or the regulatory framework. We have to communicate them things that he can get with the digital world. How he can get a job, how he can make money to bring food to his family. you know? So because we are completely disconnected from this technical kind of way of we communicate to the real world. We have to communicate with the real world. Unfortunately, technology politicians do not communicate with people today. We have to close that gap. The third element here is that we have to be a little bit of populist, because populism is the rule today. So we have to be a little bit of populist as well. You know, I was in my tenure as a minister, I was very popular. I was the #1 in every single poll, but I executed. Why? Because I had that. Yeah, because if you say, all people, I'm bringing here the best cybersecurity policy, who cares about that? But if you say, hey, I'm bringing you the technology so that your kids can study, I mean, you communicate better with people, and that's key. The other element here is how to align everybody, every stakeholder, the private sector, ONGs, how you make them involved. And look, this is not about the leadership of the government. And let me give you a good example, Argentina. Argentina created the largest number of unicorns in by far the worst government in Argentinian life, with the most violent, I wouldn't say violent, with the most aggressive environment against the technology industry. Argentina created a lot of unicorns. Why? Because they had the leadership of the private sector. They had the young people that said, no matter what happens with this government, I'm going to fight, I'm going to win, I'm going to be a global player. And that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So this is not about the government issue. This is about everybody pushing to transform their countries, to transform society, to transform their communities using technology. That's key. So we have to focus on how to execute this. This is not about to discuss what to do. We already know what to do. Google's document is good. We know how to do it. Let's now focus on how we execute it in a smart way so that everybody wins.
There's a lot of passion there, I think. And I think, Marcelo, I'm going to come back to you. But Cesar, I wanted to let you also offer your thoughts as sort of as the head of the Discovery Group Lab.
Thank you very much. Being after Diego is always a challenge, no? To try to say something as smart, as passionate as Diego. No, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you to Google. And something that I want to say in an optimistic way is that we are working with Google in different areas to make this happen, no? What Diego was saying, to execute, no? We are working in areas as responsible artificial intelligence, no? In Mexico and in other countries, to really support better social services in education, in health, of the communities, no? Because it's really good to talk about ethics and AI, no? Which is a challenge, no? Something totally different is going to a government in Mexico and saying, regional government, and saying, hey, how can we improve your school system? You know, we see it's under a lot of strain, and every year 30,000 students drop out, no? And how can we effectively use AI for that, no? Because that's a totally different conversation, no? And how we can motivate everyone, and we are doing that. And in Brazil, for instance, we're also working with Google in expanding the IT certificate, which I think is a really good tool for training youth, no, and doing all these kind of initiatives, no. And thank you to Rod. I think you've been doing a great job with him as well. So maybe I want to also raise the topic that President Chinchilla said about the alliances, no, forming alliances of entities, no? And I think this is part of the role that we can prove as multilateral entities, because at the end of the day, when we think about digital technologies, I also think that many things are around not what needs to be done, but about how to do it, and about the power, no? How we distribute power, and how we deal with the whole power struggle of making a new technology disrupt any provision of service or any industry. Well, we work a lot with entrepreneurs in many industries, and I think the easiest industries are fintech, no? Fintechs are, like, and Brazil is a great example here, are really taking over the market and doing many things, no? But wow, how we deal with that? How we do this kind of regulatory environment in which we deal with every single actor, no, in a way that we support all the situations. In Colombia, we are working with a fintech that uses blockchain for international cross payments. Wow, that's a big thing. And we thank you very much for the sandbox that you are doing right now. But when you start dealing with those situations, you really get into the moment that you say, this is something that needs to be tackled and something that we need external actors that we want to believe ourselves to deal with the whole ecosystem of entities that need to be part of the solution, because this is really complicated. And I want to congratulate the brave public sector officials that are here today, no? Because I always say that we always complain about governments, but one of the most important things is having brave public servants, no, working in governments and dealing with these situations, no. I want to end with a couple of priorities here, maybe that we are working, and I think is relevant for this discussion. One is really about jobs in the platform economy. So we all seen, and particularly in the biggest countries, no, that entities like Rappi, like Uber, no, like Cabify, many others, are really being more and more part of the economy and the jobs. And informality is really transforming into a digital informality, no? And something that, so we would like really to explore as part of one of the crucial needs for the region in the coming years, which is jobs, how we can not go back in time and create a new type of informality, but rather use all the digital solutions in terms of financial inclusion, insurance, health, training, no? So the new workers, the independent workers in an area that we are calling worker tech, no, really have this support of ecosystem of support, so they can really flourish, no, because it's really hard to believe that in the coming years the public sector will have the capacity to deal with all the needs in terms of health, education, as we were saying, no, and workers will keep going to the digital markets and to the job markets without opportunities. So how can we really make digital solutions work for workers, no, and be surrounded workers, no, and this is one of the most important things. The second most important thing is really, and we discussed this, the thing around equality, no, about gender equality. So in Latin America, inequality has been something, and is probably the biggest topic. So it's not about the opportunities, no, and we always say it's not about the future of the job, it's about the present of workers, no, it's not about the future of equality, it's about how we deal with the current inequalities with all the digital solutions, no? So there are many challenges. We are very optimistic, but again, I'm optimistic because of the existing ecosystem of partners that we have here working, no? Thank you.
As one of our enlightened officials, Raúl, would you like to make some comments?
Yes, thank you very much, Kate. Cesar, you opened the entirely new discussion that I will be so excited to be part of. So it's good when at the end of the discussion you feel that you want to have more time to continue discussing. Speaking about the document, I think the document is very good. I like it very much. This is what we are talking about every day, everywhere. That we have to take advantage of this moment to work on the long-term digital transformation and not only in the short-term economic recovery. The 4 areas make a lot of sense. The 4 areas that are included in the document. Of course, there are a lot of cross-cutting issues. President Chinchilla spoke about the digital government, what is really a huge need at this moment. And also about education, that is a whole area that we could be discussing. Let me be more pragmatic on this my speech. I see that what I'm seeing in the region is there is a lot of, in many cases, there are some tension between the measures, the policies that are taken in the short-term policies for the economic recovery and the long-term, more strategic policies that would lead us to the digital transformation and would open all the opportunities that are mentioned in the document. And so this is a very special time. So we have the pressure of every sector of the economy asking for measures to support their activities. In some cases, those short-term policies are not aligned with the long-term strategies for digital transformation. We need consistency in the policies. There are hundreds of policies at this moment being discussed in the region. When I say hundreds, I'm not exaggerating. It's really hundreds of policy. There is only one country I could mention that there are about 120 policies being discussed at this moment that have an impact, some kind of impact on digital transformation, bad or good. So we need more consistency. We need somebody that is looking for the consistency of the policies in a country. and that's taking care that the sector-oriented, the vertical policies are not contradictory with the long-term objectives of the country in terms of digital transformation. And we need much more cooperation in the region, as it was pointed out before, because we cannot reinvent the wheel every day, everywhere. And so we need, energy is the most scarce resource we have in the region. And developing public policy takes a lot of energy. It's very expensive. People think that it's for free because it's as we have the people that is being paid with their salaries, public servants and representatives or people from the private companies. But we spend a lot of money developing policies and implementing them. And in many cases, we discovered after the policy is on discussion, we discovered that the policy is negative or have some negative impacts that are not the decided impacts that's by the authors. And this is because we don't cooperate enough across the region, and we don't cooperate enough among the different actors. We need more multi-stakeholder processes. So this is the only way that we can test the policies or test the impact of the policies before we adopt those policies. And or before it is too late in the process of in the discussion process. So we have to take care of energy, that this is the most important resource we have, and this is what we have to invest in the best possible way. And something that is very important is the innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystems in the country. I think that it was Leonardo who said that changing the business models is very challenging in our countries. We need to push all the different sectors of the society to go through the innovation processes. And what's the role of the governments is to offer those tools, to provide the tools to support the transformation, to support the innovation. And some cases we are very tempted to take the opposite option, that is to protect the people, to protect some sectors of the economy against the innovation. And this is the worst thing that we can do. We cannot protect the people from innovation. We have to push them to go through innovation, supporting them, so providing all the tools that are needed for going successfully through those innovations processes. This is what we need. And the last thing that's speaking about the economy and the human, social, and economy development, we know that that is not possible without digital transformation. There is no chance of being in a better position after the pandemic than before that without solid strategies for digital transformation. And we have the digital tools there. We have the digital tools. Now some people spoke about, the previous panelists spoke about the challenges to become part of the digital economy. But now the new companies can take advantage of the payment mechanisms that are available. They can outsource the logistics, even the shops, the digital shops. So now it should be much easier now to become part of the digital economy, because we can use a lot of blocks that are available. So this is what we have to help the companies and the entrepreneurs to do. We have to help them to understand how much have changed the value chains and how they can become part of the value chains, and so support them to go through those processes. And this is what we do from Ally. So from Ally, we try to bring the perspective of the private sector, the voice of the private sector, to help to work, to collaborate with the policymakers in order to try to develop the best possible policies, and also to develop as joint endeavors to support the digital transformation in the society. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, Raúl. Marcelo?
Yeah, we have a question from the audience about how Google plans to move forward with the white paper and the study. And I just want to say that we launched the white paper 2 weeks ago in a similar event, actually in an event from Concordia, the Africa Summit, and this is the second event. And you know, at this first phase, I think the idea the main idea is to, to share, to spread the word as max as we can in forums like that, and discuss the findings, with this, like this diversity audience that we have here, government officials, private sector members, and the startup ecosystem. And the second phase would be, go and talk specifically with local governments and see how that fits with their agenda. I think, like, again, we are not here we don't intend to say that the government should do this or that. Those are examples that we've been seeing within Google around the globe that we think could be feasible for those countries. And of course, that needs to, feed into the political agenda and the economic pace that the country it's looking for. So what I can say is, keep inviting us for events like this. And from what I'd heard here from my colleagues from the panel, I think we have, a lot to talk about.
Anyone else want to weigh in finally?
I would like to, if you please, I would like to add that it's important to have not only to reduce burdens from the government side, but also to give freedom to the private sector to innovate. So we here in Brazil we launch a group of legislation on economic freedom, and we think this is the right way to keep accelerating this environment. One of the issues is to let the businessman, businesswoman to do their job, to create new innovative solutions. So one of the things I think it's important is the government to stay back, to not to avoid or not to create challenges. And in such a big countries like Brazil, where we have different socioeconomic figures on a continental country like we are, it's very hard for a government official to have a magic like a magic hand and say exactly what will make everything work. So one of the things I think is decentralize, like make the society, let the society create their own solution, and the government should work only on those aspects that where the business and the society it's not capable of doing. So as you said, skills, as you said, maybe health as a basic infrastructure. So only work as a platform. The government has to work as a platform and let the economic freedom to do everything else.
Thank you, Luis. Leonardo?
I agree with Luis that there is no magic hand in government, and also there is no magic bullet to solve all these issues. There's no one solution or one strategy for executing that solution. All those things that came into this study are very relevant. But one thing I would stress that is very important is the cooperation between government and the private sector. These public-private partnerships that you talk about are very important. In my area, we have no regulatory authority, but what we have is we are in charge of working with the private sector. And for this, we have two main tools. And those tools, one of them I call it fertilizer, and the other one I call it glue. What is the fertilizer? Fertilizer are those liquid resources that we use to put into some very specific projects that are strategic. We work in consortiums with the private sector in central innovation centers to solve specific technological needs and also needs of technological skills for those areas according to regional economic vocation. And with that fertilizer, that little seed grows a lot and it works by itself later. It has to be self-sustainable. That is great to have fertilizer, but now we have run out of fertilizer. We don't have more fertilizer in my office. And we have been working with glue. What is glue? Glue is this thing that allows to generate cohesion between different actors in the private sector to work together and do things. And that's proven to be more powerful even than the fertilizer, to my surprise. When we work with the Internet Association in Mexico to develop a scheme to train all small businesses in developing digital skills, or we work with the Mexican Association of Online Sales to do the same thing for e-commerce ecosystems, we reach very far, and we put them together with other private sector actors that are very interested in doing those things, and doing those things together, it makes a stronger push. So what I would say is, although there is no one magic bullet, this bullet is a very effective one. I highly recommend it.
Thank you so much, Leonardo. So we are at time, sadly, of a excellent and amazing beginning conversation, we hope, that really spurs continued partnership. I would like to say, on the behalf of the Digital Impact Alliance, we have a saying that's sort of like, in this journey to achieve a digital economy through digital transformation, we all have something to learn and something to teach. I think today really highlighted the degree to which we all need to work together. I'd like to offer that if we only could have applied AI to this, we could have had a virtual real world word cloud, but some of the key themes that I really heard, besides fertilizer and glue, which I particularly loved, was sort of the importance of regional partnerships, jobs, how we're going to invest together, and overall education, the underpinning of core building block technologies, financial services, ID, other pieces, policies that can really be put in place that are both appropriately protect, but also really balance consumer and actually business participation in this, and are the degree to which we all work together and come together to learn from one another. I particularly loved Raúl's point, which I sort of reframed as sort of reduce, reuse, and recycle, that we do not all need to learn exactly the same lessons from one another. And I think that's where strong regional cooperation and collaboration can take place. Thank you all so much for your participation. Really want to thank Concordia, and in particular Google, for sponsorship of this today, and for presenting us with the white paper. It was a really great piece of work, and I'm sure we'll all hopefully be back here together soon. Thanks so much.